So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our preparing for the institutes at HIV is Not a Crime for HINAC 6, Raleigh, North Carolina. My name is Barb Cardell. I'm the program director at PWN USA. I use they, them pronouns, and we are so glad to have you all with us today. This is going to be an opportunity to talk about the Racial Justice and Gender Justice Institutes and how they are going to interplay with us coming together in Raleigh as we are working on HIV decriminalization and modernization work, how it supports both the time and the spaces. So with that, this is a learning space. I just want to lift up that this is a learning space. And so we want everyone to be gentle with both yourself as well as with each other. There might be some challenging thoughts that we're sharing here. This might be something that's new to you. We really want to encourage everyone to come together in a framework of being really here, coming to make the space better with each other. So our objectives today are pretty straightforward. We understand the history, the theory, and the purpose behind the institutes, why we have these institutes, what they mean. We want to talk about at least some introductory thoughts around supporting racial and gender justice within our HINAC learning spaces and at the Training Academy. We'll talk about some common ways that some of these challenges have shown up in past HIV is Not a Crime academies and how we can go ahead and really address those and interrupt them. We want to talk about how our actions have these unintended consequences, knowing that impact is sometimes not exactly what our intentions are, and that we need to acknowledge the impact that we have on others. And then finally, we'll talk about the social and emotional cost of failing to interrupt harm when we are in these spaces together. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. This is the HIV is Not a Crime, Getting Prepared, talking about the institutes and our racial and gender justice learning spaces. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Is there anyone who wants to come off of mute and help me read this invitation to brave spaces?
Together we
I
will
have you, Bob.
All right. Sarah, why don't you do the first half and then we'll ask Apollo to do the second half. Apollo, it's good to see you. So Sarah, why don't you go ahead and do the first 5 or 6 lines, please.
Okay, an invitation to brave space. Hello, everybody. Together we will create brave space because there's no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds in this space. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. By Mickey Scott. By Mickey Scott Bay Jones.
Barbie, you're on mute.
Thank you. Kelly. We wanted to start off with that poem, and thank you for reading it, Miss Sarah, as a reminder that we come to all of these spaces and these conversations knowing that we are imperfect, but by being together and being braver, that we really encourage ourselves and each other to have these be spaces where we can grow, where we can think, where we can be safer together. So, we really are today on our webinar and in our conversation, wanting to talk about why these institutes have been formed, why when we talk about especially racial institutes, we are having them a part of our conversation. And we acknowledge that at HIV is not a crime training academies in the past, that there has been harm that has been done, and that we continue to try and address past harms by acknowledging both the impact and our commitment to learning and to doing better as we move forward. So in this space, we're going to have a chance to hear from all of our leaders from our Institute spaces, as well as to have an opportunity to have conversations amongst ourselves while we're here. So once again, I want to thank you all for joining us, and want to just start off by opening with a chance to say, you know, when we come to HIV is not a crime, and we're not thinking deeply about our commitment to racial justice and to gender justice and to inclusive language and to intentionally showing up in particular ways, what do we stand to lose? And this is an opportunity for people to raise your hand, come off of mute, and to share when we're not really intentionally making these spaces Black liberatory spaces, trans liberatory spaces, BIPOC liberatory spaces with intentionality. What do we stand to lose? And I can go ahead and I can start us off, but if people want to come on, and Apollo, I see you're ready to go. And so I'll go ahead and I'll share first. You know, what we stand to lose for me when I don't show up in these spaces really wanting to uplift Black and trans liberation is I lose the opportunity to learn from so many people and to stand as an ally and an accomplice in this critical work that we do. Apollo, do you have something you want to share?
I was just gonna basically share that sentiment that we lose the unification, we lose the power of the group of the numbers that we do have when we start separating like that, and we start pointing out our differences rather than that commonality that we need to fight together toward. But yeah, I'm right there with you on the unification. It definitely diverts from it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. That's a powerful reminder. LaDonna.
Hi, yes, good evening. We lose the power of healing and learning how to help others heal through our stories, through our trials, through our tribulations, through the good and the bad.
Thank you, LaDonna. And somebody just messaged me in the chat that, and this is something really important for us to remember, that we lose our community, that sometimes people, when they come into spaces and feel as if they have not been seen or acknowledged, that we lose them, that they don't come back if we don't have a space that feels like we are intentionally trying to include them. Yeah, we lose freedom. Nikayla, I see you got your hand raised. What would you like to share?
Hey, I like to share when you say, what do you stand to lose? You lose if you don't open your mind to meeting new people and just being open to learning.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. Anyone else want to come off of mute or raise your hand to share? What do we lose when we don't really intentionally address anti-Blackness, transmisia, any sort of racism that shows up in the spaces that we are soon in 9 days going to be holding together?
I'll jump in. I think we stand to lose paths of communication that are really important to have an open conversation and be able to relate to one another.
Thank you, Eric. I'm going to go ahead. Sonia has written, we lose ourselves.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's all right. That's all right. Sonia wrote in the chat, we lose ourselves. And then we've got Carrie, and then we'll get you, Deirdre.
I think bringing this back to the fact that this is about HIV modernization, we leave people behind when we're making our modernization efforts if we haven't created safe space and allowed for authentic dialogue.
Thank you, Carrie. Deirdre.
We also stand to lose our history. in the history of those of us that have fought before us, that are fighting beside us, and those of us that have done the work, but then are continuously. So we don't want to erase people or history that have got us to this point. And I think there's a African saying about Sankofa: we always got to know and look from our past to be able to know what our future is going to look like. And if not only we, but future generations can't even find out what our past looks like, then we are going to be failing them, and they're going to be failing at whatever progress that they are containing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deirdre. It's a beautiful quote. Robert, would you like to share what we stand to lose?
When we lose, we lose sight of purpose. I mean, all of us are here for a purpose, and we lose sight of purpose. And I mean, that's humans' whole destiny, to find purpose and strive for that purpose in order to advance in this world.
Thank you, Robert. And then in the chat we lose the ability to see the foundation to build the liberation we're striving for. We lose diversity, we lose our voice, and then finally put in, we lose our heart. So those are reminders of why we do this work and why we're committed and why we wanted to actually have this conversation before we even get to HINAC, to be able to talk about the institutes and how those really support the work that we're committed to doing as we're working around modernization and decriminalization. We want to make sure that we are not losing our heart and our connection to our community. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kelly, who is going to talk to us a little bit about, when we're talking about these racial caucuses, what do we mean by them and why are they important?
Beautiful. Thank you, Barb. Hey, y'all. My name is Kelly Flannery. I use she, her, they pronouns, and I am PWN's policy director. I'm so glad to be here with you all. I'm going to start off with this quote from Kelsey Blackwell. This is from an article called "Why People of Color Need Spaces Without White People" that Sally Thomas, who's a part of BULI, shared with me. So the quote says, the values of whiteness are in the water which we all swim. No one is immune. Those values dictate who speaks, how loud, when, the words we use, what we don't say, what is ignored, who is validated, and who is not. Unless we are actively and persistently dismantling these constructs, we are abiding by them. So the caucuses give us a tool to actively and persistently dismantle these constructs, to start to recognize the waters of whiteness and white supremacy in which we all swim. So what is a caucus, or some folks might call it an affinity group? These are spaces that are intentionally created for folks who share an identity to convene. The reason why the group is actually convening might differ depending on the identity of the group, their experience of oppression, and their experience of structural violence. An example of this is that caucuses based on racial identity are generally comprised of people who share a specific racial or ethnic identity. This could be Black, Latina, Indigenous people, AAPI people, Asian American and Pacific Islanders, people who hold multiracial identities, or white people. To advance Black liberation and racial justice, there's work for white people and people of color to do separately and together, and caucuses give us space to do this work separately. So caucuses invite people of color groups to hold their own spaces and invites white people to hold spaces to examine the construct of whiteness and our participation in white supremacy. Specifically, it invites us to really intentionally take responsibility, white people, for our own learning about race and racism. And it's a space where Black and brown people aren't forced to teach white folks, to comfort white folks, or to face further trauma and pain as we stumble along and make mistakes. But instead, it allows Black and brown people to create and define a space in their own terms. Valuing, respecting, and protecting spaces for people of color is crucial to the resistance of oppression. Now I'm gonna go off script a little bit, right? Because what we're talking about here are really creating spaces where we can resist oppression. And I want to talk about how this relates to HIV criminalization in particular. We know that we're brought together here to try to dismantle HIV criminalization, to decriminalize HIV criminalization. And in order to do that, right, HIV criminalization is embedded with the racism, the transmisia. Transmisia means hatred of trans people, the misogyny of our systems. And if we as individuals are continuing to bring racism and transmisia into the spaces where we organize with the people we organize with, if we replicate the harms of the systems that we are trying to dismantle, we're not going to be able to do what we need to together. And so racial caucuses allow us to kind of build together with folks of a shared identity, so that, especially like I'm speaking for right now the white caucus because I am white, right? It allows us to really interrogate how we bring whiteness and white supremacy into spaces to see it more clearly, so that we can address it when it creeps up in ourselves, in other people, and in the systems that we're trying to dismantle together. And I really want to make sure that I'm leaving space for all of the institutes to talk about their why in their own words. So next slide, please. So now we're going to turn it over to our institute leaders to tell us a little bit more about their institute. So we're going to start here with BULI. Diane, I'd love to invite you in. Diane, could you tell us a little bit about your institute, why it's critical, and how it furthers the decriminalization work we're doing at HINAC?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces and also some new faces. I'm excited to see you all in 9 days. My apologies, somebody is standing outside my window. Hopefully you can't hear it. My name is Diane Burkholder. My pronouns are she, her. I'm joining you all from Tongva land, otherwise known as Long Beach, California. So I'm a West Coast person. However, when I got involved with BULI and HINAC, I was a Midwestern person. I grew up partially in the Midwest, and I lived in Kansas City for 9 years. And so that's when I got involved with BULI, and BULI started as a result, just like there is a need in many communities for us to create spaces for one another. There was a conversation with several Black folks that attended HINAC 2 that was in Huntsville, Alabama in 2016. And I had to go back and I was like, oh my gosh, it's been almost 10 years. And so there was a comment that happened from a white person in the audience, and I don't recall what they said. It was like a really inappropriate question / comment, and it caused a lot of tension. And it wasn't really addressed very well. And it was particularly directed to Black folks. And a lot of us were like, what is going on? We need a space, when something happens, you need a space to unpack and be like, what just happened? Does that make sense? Oh my gosh, I'm angry, just to be with one another. So actually, I had to go back and get all of our names. So the folks that started BULI were Max Boykin, who will be here this coming week, Devin Hersey, Vanita Ray, who you all know, Arnita, who was the former policy director, who was before Kelly, Wahida, who y'all know from Philadelphia, Tony Michelle Williams from Atlanta, and then also Kenyon Farrow, Olivia Ford, and Cedric Pulliam were also involved at the beginning, right? And so we got together and we were like, what do we do? And so we started organizing, and in 2018, when we were in Indianapolis, we created, I don't even know if we had the name of BULI at the point. And so Black United, we started as an institute, right? We didn't know that these institutes would grow, right? We're like, let's just get together and have a space for Black folks in the HIV community to learn from one another. And after we saw, I think we had about 60 folks. It was a full day session that Kenyon came, and we did as a half day session. Kenyon came and spoke to us about the history of criminalization, not even just criminalization of HIV, but criminalization of the Black body. We talked about Black resistance movements, talking about harm reduction and connection between all of these movements. And I think we had probably about 40 to 50, we probably had closer to 50 folks there. And after that, people are like, we need more. So Institute became initiative. So now we are the Black United Leadership Initiative. And we have met every HINAC since. And we were the first institute to get started. In many spaces, Black folks start things, and then other folks are like, we need our own spaces too, right? And I think it's really important to the origin story for y'all that saw Sinners. You see the origin story of music and blues, right? Started in Africa. The banjo came from Africa, right? And those narratives often get erased. And so the three components that we have within our space is we talk about Blackness. What does Blackness mean? The making of Blackness, but also internalized racism. What happens, white supremacy culture, when we, fighting with one another, and colorism. And those are messy conversations that we want you all to have in each of your institutes, right? We call them like in-house family conversations, right? People had a lot of unpacking to do. And a lot of people are like, this is the first time that I've been in a space with Black folks that are in the HIV community intentionally. Maybe people had friends, but it was intentional. So we did that. And we also talked about Black joy. Joy is resistance. We see that there is fun cuts to arts and culture. That is intentional. That Black folks need to have a space to celebrate and joy and movement, right? And then the third component is obviously talking about criminalization of HIV, but also criminalization of the Black body, right? And why is this particularly important for the HIV movement? We just saw, and I actually will put it in the chat if you're not aware, our lovely federal administration yesterday announced the Department of Justice is going to drop police investigations in several cities, including Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed. I believe there's over a dozen investigations of police misconduct across this country, and the DOJ has dropped their investigations. This is directly anti-Blackness. This is connected obviously to police brutality, but how Black folks are treated. And we know how that spills over with HIV criminalization and also sentencing for Black folks, right? So this is a direct correlation. And we know this is tough. This is hard. The world is falling apart, and community care is so important. And the last thing I'll say is, beyond just getting together at BULI, we've really been looking at how do we expand and support people outside of this space, right? And so we often will do pop-ups outside of other HIV conferences if it's just Black folks get to know each other. But we also started calls called Love Calls for Tiffany Morero. Those of you familiar with her is a young Black woman who was born living with HIV. She unfortunately passed away 2 weeks before our last BULI. And when we were getting together 6 months prior, she was dealing with a lot of stuff. And she was like, I just need people to be with me. And so we started on Fridays just calling in, and just whoever could join. And it was so amazing just to be with Black folks in that space. We didn't have to talk about HIV. You didn't have to talk about work, but it was just Black folks loving on each other. So in honor of Tiffany, we've continued those calls, but we really want to make sure that they're open and available for folks to tune in. So you'll show up at our space. We'll give you more information, but they're the first and third Friday of the month from 1:30 to 4:30 p.m. And those are a Black specific place for anybody that's in the HIV community. Just a way to wind down your life, wind down your week, and talk about your life going into the weekend. So that is it in a nutshell. We get together, we have fun, we have a little merch. We ordered some cute things for y'all this year. And just real quick before I pass it on, how many Black folks have not been to BULI before? This is your first HINAC. Okay, see a couple put it in the chat or a little thumbs up. Okay, all right. Okay. There's Deidre. Deidre can tell you her own story, which we will tell you in person, how she came into BULI and is now one of our core organizers. So thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you all, and I look forward to seeing you next week in North Carolina. All right, y'all. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Diane. All right, let's go ahead. And Javi, are you able to come off mute? Are you still with us? You are. Hey.
Hey, hi. And thanks for backup. So the Latine Institute, let's see, I was in Virginia. So we had about 26 activists from the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, the US, and Latin America, and gather on our first HINAC. Was supported obviously by our friends at CERO and at US BLHIV Caucus. who's without their support, we have not been where we are. So our goal was basically to train the activists, right, on the Latin community on the laws that obviously criminalize HIV. We also try to advocate for reforms to abolish and modernize these laws and to generate momentum within our community around HIV policies. Also, we aim to speak with a collective voice on issues of concern of all Latinas living with HIV. And another thing that we've been effective is on language justice. We, from the beginning at Latinx Plus, have been able, with the support of grants, to provide translation services for all our webinars are in Spanish with simultaneous interpretation to English. And we were able to do that as well in our first Latin Institute. So what is language justice? So basically providing a language interpretation demonstrates our commitment to language justice by ensuring equitable access and inclusion for all participants. Language justice recognizes that everyone has the right to communicate in their preferred language and participate fully in a space where no language dominates. This approach goes beyond basic language and access and aims to create multilingual environments where all languages are valued and respected. So that said, our Latin Institute at HINAC 6, the title is Organizing for Survival, Supporting Immigrant Latina PLHIV in a Time of Danger. Well, I don't have to go into details. We all know that we're experiencing a very difficult situation, but we will focus on the urgent fight to defend the rights of HIV-positive Latin immigrants who are experiencing escalating political repression in the United States. The Institute will feature 3 Afro-Latinas, all living with HIV, starting with Justa Suazo. She is a member of the International Community of Women Living with HIV. Milani Varela, who's a gender non-conforming activist and CDC ambassador to Let's Stop HIV Together. And our board member, our colleague, Antoinette Etienne, who's a founding member of Latinx Plus, and she would advocate for incarcerated immigrant women and former incarcerated immigrant women living with HIV. Additionally, we have a special guest, is an attorney from Aiden Ryan Shang, is executive director at Oasis Legal Services, who is an expert on immigration law and will be answering questions real time. Adam is an adoptive parent of 2 Chicanos or Latin descent. And again, our institute will be in Spanish with simultaneous interpretation to English, and it will be transmitted to our network in the Caribbean, in Latin America, and in the US. So that's in a nutshell what's going on at the Latin Institute.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Javi. Next up, I'm going to pass it over. Barb, I believe I'm passing it to you for the Trans Institute intro.
Yeah, I just wanted to check and make sure that Cody or Tiami is not on.
Yes, I'm here. Tiami asked me to jump on.
There you are. Fantastic. Cody, do you mind doing an introduction for the Trans Institute then?
Yes, I can do it right quick. Cody, in the Midwest, I'm representing Positively Trans and just stepping in for Tiami. So she'll be leading our institute team, executive orders for the trans community. Which is also creating like a heightened us living with HIV, filed lawsuits against Trump, and then talking about the efficacy of the judicial system against the executive branch, and what powers we have, how we can navigate despite what the current regime is looking to accomplish against our communities. We'll have some resources that we'll share in the Hoover app. We have some resources in our booth. Then of course you can always come and find us while we're there at HINAC. Yeah, I'll be around. I enjoy breaking bread with other trans folks, so you can find me. And that's pretty much it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Cody. I appreciate you for joining us even when you're on the road. Awesome. All right, y'all. Next up, I am going to pass it over to Carrie to talk about the Multiracial Institute. I believe I saw you on. I did, I think. All right, it's possible that Carrie had to jump off or fell off. So instead, Eric, can I pass it to you to talk about the White Folks Dismantling Racism and HIV Spaces Institute?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Fleiter, he, him pronouns. I am with Zero Project, Communications Director. And I'm also part of White Folks Dismantling Racism. And I was tasked with the question of why white folks dismantling racism as an institute is crucial. And so I put my words on paper because I'm a little better at that than winging it. So we as white people have a lot of work on our own to do. As a white person with HIV, I've realized how important it is to have spaces where we can talk honestly about race and privilege without putting that burden on folks who already face so much. It's on us to educate ourselves and support each other through that process. Anti-racism also makes us better allies in the HIV community. Racism and HIV are deeply connected, especially in how care and stigma show up. If we're serious about ending the epidemic, we have to be serious about addressing racism as well. And that starts with understanding how we as white people fit into that picture. It's about moving from being quiet to taking real action. So these conversations can be uncomfortable, but they're necessary. Having space to unpack things with other white folks helps us show up more fully and responsibly, whether it's in our clinics, communities, or our advocacy work. So at the White Folks Dismantling Racism Institute, we'll have Lane Bradford, Kat Griffith, Pat Miglior, I think is how you say their name, and Ellen Tuzzolo will be leading our institute. Lane, Kat, and Pat will be kind of helping support Ellen. And I apologize, I don't remember Ellen's organization that she works with, but we've worked with the organization a few times, and they've brought a lot of really great insight to the White Folks Institute. And we're just going to show up and figure out how we can best combat anti-racism and in our spaces. Did that answer the question?
It did. Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. I believe that Carrie has rejoined us. Carrie, are you here?
I think so. If all
There
the
you
technology
are. Hey. Could you go ahead and tell us a little bit about the Multiracial Institute?
Absolutely. Sorry for no video. I'm afraid if I turn it on, I will lose my already not great connection. But I am Carrie Perry, or Carrie Hartel. People may also know me by. And I am filling in. So this originally started off being called Beyond Three. So beyond sort of the big three: Black, white, or Latinx. And the Multicultural Institute will be sort of open for anyone who would like to join, but folks who have something beyond those three identities or multiple of those three identities. So I was sort of asked to fill this space and be able to step in. This is the first time that we will be having a Multicultural Institute, which I think is amazing. So I've attended most of the HINACs. And participated at one point in White Folks Dismantling Racism, but don't feel like I fit fully in that box because I have different ethnicities. And so the Latinx Institute never quite felt right. The white folks didn't quite feel right. And I think we had a lot of folks last year who didn't really identify with any of those or couldn't choose one of their identities. So this space will really be about unpacking sort of the intersectionality that folks might represent. There will be some of the same components that folks have already talked about, but we're baby. It's our first year, so we will sort of shape what this might look like moving forward, because hopefully the Multicultural Institute will continue, but we'll do a little bit of unpacking around what it means to show up in spaces with different identities. What does it mean if you show up? So I know no one can see me, but I'm pretty pale and identify as a Latina and often don't really get seen as a Latina or get identified predominantly as a white woman. And I have lots of other hats that I wear in terms of my perspective. So I'm the mom to a biracial Black child, and I see a lot of that perspective from her. So we will be able to sort of talk about what it means to show up as a multi-ethnic, multi-diverse, or someone that doesn't fit into those three pretty boxes of white, Black, or Latinx. And what that means for our work in advocacy, what that means as we move forward trying to modernize HIV criminalization laws, what that means to our voices. So I'm sure I'm not the only person that will have this perspective, but I know I often am tentative to speak up because I know how I am seen and I don't want it to seem like it's not a place that I should raise my voice, like I am a big mouth white person making an inappropriate comment in a conversation that doesn't apply. We'll do a lot of unpacking around that and some activities about embracing that and how we acknowledge the experiences of our other institutes, what it means for folks that we're working with who might be attending the BULI or are at White Folks Dismantling Racism or are part of our Latinx or trans institutes. So super excited to sort of birth this new institute. Look forward to anyone sort of joining that doesn't feel like you fit in the box and would like to unpack intersectionality and sort of what your diversity brings to the table, challenges the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I can't wait to see everyone at HINAC.
All right. My thanks to all of the Institute leaders, representatives who are able to join us here today. I really appreciate you for coming and for sharing the reasons behind your Institute, what folks can expect if they attend. Just so everyone on this call knows, the Institutes are on Sunday, June 1st. We're going to start off with the Institute plenary. That's 1 to 2:30 p.m. And then we'll go into the Institute free flow, which is going to be a time where folks can walk around a little bit and experience different institutes from 1 to 2:30. And then the actual institutes will be 4 to 6. So that will be when the institutes are limited to the folks who are actually a member of those institutes. And with that, I am going to go ahead and pass it over to Barb because we're going to transition into a bit more of a conversation on interrupting harm. So Barb, pass it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Appreciate and thank you to all of the Institute leaders for the introductions. It's taste about what you're all going to talk about. And it seems like from the chat that people have gotten very excited about the opportunities to learn and have these discussions, which we're very excited about. Just want to go ahead and say, that when we're talking about interrupting harm and we're talking about HIV is not a crime and we're talking about the institutes, the reason why we're kind of laying this foundation for you all is we want to make sure that we know that when we show up that we have a long history of both HIV advocacy, but also around when we're thinking about interrupting harms that have been done, but harms that have been addressed, not in the moment. And so when we really think about sharing these spaces, we want to acknowledge the impact that has been problematic in the past, and to try and come to these spaces to learn and do better. So we've talked about the reasons why the institutes were formed and founded and how long they have been going along. We've talked about really making sure that we are thinking about the institutes and the identities that people will be able to join. And we're hoping that everyone will join an institute, that way we can come together and do some collective learning. And then we want to go ahead and practice in our HIV advocacy spaces so that we then can go out into the world and do our advocacy around HIV decriminalization, as well as do some of our work around lifting up challenging anti-Black, lifting up Black liberation and trans liberation, Latina liberation, because we know that it takes all of us to do this work, and we wanted to come together and do it in allyship and with active accomplishing. So I just want to go back and I want to remind us, as we opened up this conversation, we said, what do we stand to lose when we don't really intentionally lean into racial justice, gender justice, and in our advocacy spaces? We lose our friends, we lose our community, we lose our heart, we lose our voices, we lose the inclusion, diversity, and as Kamari has said, that I just kind of come back, we lose our foundation. And that was something that Deirdre mentioned in the quote that she shared with us as well. So this is why we are leaning deeply into both talking about our racial justice and our gender justice institutes, but we also want to give people something to think about, like, how do we interrupt the harm when we're coming into these spaces? And so what's at stake? What's at stake is for people being able to show up as their whole selves. What's at stake is for people to be seen and acknowledged in all of their intersectionalities and their complexities, and to be invited into spaces in a way that they feel both safer, protected, and acknowledged and appreciated in all of those differences. So we want to try and have our HIV advocacy spaces and especially our HINAC spaces, when we come together, as a place that we can have this and lift it up. And so we're going to go ahead, and as we're talking about interrupting harm, we wanted to share some definitions. Then we're going to talk about some examples of harm, some of which have happened at HINAC, and Diane actually has mentioned some harms that have happened as well. Then we're going to talk about some practical tools to interrupt harm. These are just examples. These are not all inclusive, but they're just giving us an opportunity to start this conversation. And then we'll have an opportunity to talk about how we want to commit to showing up at HIV is not a crime, and how we are going to commit to lifting up each other and really holding these spaces. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who's going to go over some of our definitions.
Thank you, Barb. So there are a lot of words that we will come across that are important to know, especially as it deals with anti-racism, especially anti-Black racism, and the institute spaces in general. And so there is a glossary of definitions of a lot of different words that we'll come across. But I will give you kind of my easier to understand definitions of these particular words that are listed on the slide. So racism. Racism is treating people unfairly or seeing them as less valuable because of their race. It's not just personal prejudice. It also includes systems and rules in society that give advantages to some groups, usually white people, while harming others. Anti-Black racism is a specific kind of racism that targets specifically Black people. It includes stereotypes, discrimination, violence, and policies that have been built over time to keep Black communities at a disadvantage. The next definition is xenophobia. Xenophobia is the fear or dislike of people from other countries. It often shows up as a prejudice against immigrants or anyone seen as foreign. And we're seeing this day in and day out with what's happening on a national level with folks who are undocumented being targeted for sending them away, which is not what we like. White supremacy. White supremacy is the belief, sometimes obvious and sometimes hidden, that white people are better or more deserving than people of other races. It's also the system that keeps white people in positions of power and privilege in society. And I will add that this is also known as white delusion, which was coined by Lane Bradford, who will be helping with our session. The next word is white fragility. Well, I guess those are two words. So white fragility is the defensive reaction many white people have when race or racism is brought up, like getting angry, feeling guilty, or shutting down. These reactions can stop real conversations and learning from happening. Next is privilege. Privilege is an unearned advantage some people have just because of who they are, like being white, straight, or able-bodied. Privilege doesn't mean your life is easy. It just means that your race or another identity just isn't making it harder. And then finally, oppression. So oppression is the unfair treatment that keeps certain groups of people down over time. It can be built into laws, schools, healthcare, and other systems, and it often targets people based on race, gender, sexuality, class, or ability. And Diane noted in the chat that we all have privileges, and that's absolutely correct. Some people hold more keys than others when it comes to privilege. And then also in the slide, racial microaggressions are a brief and commonplace daily verbal and behavioral insults and invalidations, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults toward people of color. These happen often, and though we may not think that we don't think that we're harming anyone, it's when all of these build up on each other that causes harm. So for instance, like telling someone who doesn't speak English as a first language, saying, you know, you speak English really well, for someone who didn't learn it first off, or asking a Black woman to touch her hair. I'm a hairdresser. I always asked permission to touch anyone's hair. It's just consent. So, and those are some of the definitions of words that will come across in this work this weekend. And I will send it off to Kelly so she can talk about some examples.
Thanks, Eric. I'm actually gonna go a little rogue on this. Can you skip forward 1, 2, 3, 4 slides for me?
Where are we going?
Back one.
Back one, okay.
Okay. So I'm actually going to go backwards through these slides, and I apologize for going a little bit off, but I wanted to use this to make a point of something that I'm noticing. So what I was asked to do is to come up with and provide some common examples of ways that harm show up, and particularly ways that like white folks harm Black and brown people, because HINAC is a space where we are doing our best to address like racialized systems of harm and oppression, policing, mass incarceration, surveillance, particularly of Black and brown bodies. And so we have a duty at HINAC, just like we do everywhere, to make sure that we're not replicating those harms. So the examples that I'm going to go through are particularly kind of talking to white people. And so I wanted to name that one of the things I wanted to talk about here are ways that white folks tend to react when confronted with whether they did something, said something that was racist or caused harm. And some of the things that we see is arguing or avoidance or just checking out of the conversation entirely. So this can look like saying like, oh, but my intentions were good. You know my heart. I didn't mean it. Or you misunderstood me, and then putting the burden on the other person, right? Saying that it's their fault, that they were wrong. Just saying like, I'm not racist, right? Trying to check out of the conversation. Being silent. Or saying like, why are you attacking me? Basically recentering yourself, making yourself the victim in this conversation. The reason that I wanted to bring this up right now is because I am really sitting with the number of HINAC participants we likely have, and acknowledging that a lot of the white HINAC participants I suspect are not in this space right now. And I name that because in the invitation that we wrote to this, we specifically said we encourage white folks to come because the point was to give a little bit of grounding and to acknowledge that when white folks show up in spaces, especially spaces where their voices aren't centered, there tends to be a backlash, right? White backlash is a thing. And so we wanted to create this space to interrupt that. And I just need to name that I suspect the reason that more white people aren't here right now is precisely because of this silence, this ability to check out, this ability to think that you don't need to engage in conversations of racism or conversations that make you uncomfortable or prioritizing your own comfort over racial justice, over what is very true violence to Black and brown bodies. So I asked to start here to name that because white folks dismantling racism, we still have a lot of work to do, and it's reflected in this call right now. And I'm going to continue with the slides, unless I wanted to see if anyone, I wanted to invite, does anyone have anything they want to say?
Outside of thank you for calling that out and in, at the same time, I'm gonna I will only speak for me, but thank you for being transparent in that moment. Thank you.
Can I just check in with everyone? Can you all see the slides okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and Sonia, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Yeah, Kelly, I'm right there with you. Like, it's disgusting the amount of people that look like you and I that aren't here for this call for precisely the reason why you sent it, which is why I'm precisely here, is to make sure that we understand our roles and what we need to do. And it's on ourselves to educate ourselves. It's not up to the people we love and the people we call family. It's up to us to do that. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I completely am right with you, Kelly. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sonia. All of this to say we still have a lot of work to do, and I'm gonna keep going forward. Eric, we're gonna move backwards in the slides because I did this. Other way. There we go. Okay, so some other examples of harm that we've seen that are common that we want to really just name now so that we can critically like catch them if they show up at HINAC. So I'm calling this gaslighting. I'm not sure if that's exactly the right term, but it's things like when a white person is in a conversation, likely about like race or racism, or just in general, right? Telling the person to calm down, saying you're too aggressive. Aggressive is a very coded term. You're too angry, you're too loud. What you're actually saying to that person is that their anger is unjustified, right? You're saying that their experience is not the experience that they should be having. That's why I take this to be gaslighting. It's like you're denying their experience. You're also saying that like the ways that I communicate are the right ways to communicate. The ways that I feel are the right ways to feel. Your anger has no place here. That's what you're saying when you are denying someone's anger in a very real conversation. It also polices people's behaviors and polices their reactions using kind of like a white supremacist framework. And so naming that is one example of ways that we do harm. And Eric, back another. Silencing. Oh, I'm going to pause. I see Grace's hand. Go ahead, Grace.
Just thinking, it may not need an answer. So the conversations that go on openly, and then there are conversations that go on in secret where you never hear what somebody says, but they're equally harmful. How do you handle that? The whispers, the conversations behind one's back.
I think that's a really good question, Grace, right? And that's why, like, in particular, we need white folks to hold white people accountable, right? Because oftentimes what happens is folks feel comfortable being racist when they're talking to a white person. Folks feel comfortable being anti-Black when they're talking to a white person. And so my goal is I want to be a white person who's not safe to be racist to. If you are racist in front of me, I am going to ask you about it. We're going to talk about it. We are going to make sure that we're digging into what's going on. Because if you allow that racism to go unchallenged, if you allow that harm to go unchallenged, just like if you allow someone to say something anti-trans to you and you allow it to go unchallenged, what you're doing is participating in that harm. You are furthering it. And so that's really on the person who's in that backdoor conversation, because it does happen, to say, wait, what do you mean? That's not okay. All right, Eric, thank you for that, Grace. And please, folks, if you have any questions, happy to, or if you have comments, yeah, jump in. Back one more for me, Eric. Perfect. Silencing. This is something that I have seen in so many places, and I'm not gonna lie, I participate in this one. I try my best not to, and I try to watch out for myself. But what this looks like is talking over other people, stealing ideas and not crediting them, right? Like we hear about this all the time, like white men in particular saying something that a Black woman just said and then claiming it as their own idea and getting credit for that. Taking up too much space, what I'm probably doing right now. Unnecessary correcting, right? This is just like when you nitpick someone because you don't want to actually engage with their ideas, right? You don't want to respond to the content of what they say. So then instead you say like, oh, I think you meant to say nor, not or whatever. This falls into grammar policing as well. What you're actually saying when you do these things, when you talk over someone, when you take up a lot of space such that other folks can't occupy this space, you're ultimately saying, I'm more important than you. My voice matters more than yours. The thing that you're saying, the way that you're saying something matters more than what you're actually saying. Or I just don't want to engage with what you're saying. That's what you're telling that person when you do these things. And the outcome, what happens because you did this, You silence folks, you demean their contributions, their very real contributions. You undervalue their contributions. You steal the labor of Black and brown people, and especially Black women, by not giving them the credit they are due for the labor that they have done, or that your voice does not matter. Yes, thank you, Deidre. And I see that Diane just also put in a link, a great satire site about ways to avoid tough combos. Back one more. Yep, okay, this is the last slide for me. Calling this one color blindness. This is when you pretend, white folks do this, when folks pretend that race doesn't matter, right? There's only one race, the human race. I don't see race, I see everyone the same. The message that you're giving off when you say that is that, like, for me, everyone's the same. There's no reality to racism, anti-Blackness, or xenophobia. There's no real difference between us. There's no real racism. It denies the experience of Black and brown people and allows the dominant culture, which is white supremacy, heteronormativity, transmisia, queerphobia. It allows our isms to go unchallenged because you're not giving reality to the structures of oppression that are hurting people. And I'm gonna pause there to see if anyone wants to add. Harms that I've missed talking about, ways you wanna like reframe something that I said.
Kelly, so as a Black man, and I'm face to face with a racist white person, and they say something that's racist. They deny it, as you know, well, most do, but they deny it. So how do how should I react? I mean, knowing that they're racist, you just made a racist statement, but yet, you're denying it. And I mean, how do I, because it done struck up emotions in me, and me myself, actually, when someone denies something that I know that they're guilty of, it actually really makes me more, you know, makes my emotions deeper. You understand? So how do you? What's a good way to handle that? You think?
I don't know how to answer that question. I know how to answer how I think white folks should handle being around you and hearing that, which is to affirm what you know is true, that what just happened was racist. But I'm gonna pass it over to Diane. I see that your hand's up.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up, Robert. It's also a reminder for us to talk about this in BULI, like strategies of when you're dealing with this face to face. Quickly, I will say one is to not discount your feelings. Two is your relationship with that person. Is it worth having that conversation? I have white folks that I work with and I call them white people whispers. That's not my ministry, is to teach white people about their stuff. I know that I have some white ancestry, but and I know people will listen to me a little different. So when stuff like that happens, one, if it's kind of like a joke, I go, I don't understand. Can you help it? I don't get it. And then people sometimes will stop in their tracks. But also if you have non-Black folk, somebody that they're in relationship with that can have that conversation with them. Those are just couple quick strategies. And also, like, take care of yourself. It is not your role to help, because people know when they're acting up, but it becomes a power thing. And so you have the power to control yourself and how you react in that, and to honor your own feelings. But we will definitely thank you for bringing this up, because this is something we should talk about in do some role plays when we're with each other next week.
Thank you so much, Diane. And thank you, Robert. I appreciate you both. All right. Seeing no other questions, I thank you all, and I'm gonna go ahead and I believe I'm passing it over to Barb.
Yep, that is me. And I just want to lift up that Joshua responded to to ask a follow-up question to see what their intent is. And that Myra acknowledges that she's gotten that attitude from her white folks. Yeah. And absolutely, these are conversations that we all need to be having as we're moving into these spaces. Diane, I see your hands up. Did you have something you wanted to add, or? Okay, got it. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't kind of missing out if you had another thought you wanted to share. So when we come into these spaces, we wanted to go ahead and give people a couple of things around how to harm. Sorry, spell check obviously was not working on the slides. I'm not sure what word I was even going there. These are some suggestions around interrupting or disrupting harm. And these are just a few. Strategies are as wide and as varied as how people are showing up in spaces and how they feel prepared to engage. The first one that I want to go ahead and say for some folks, especially if someone is making a racist comment and you are there as a person of color, you do not need to even stay in that conversation. You can absolutely just entirely leave because oftentimes the explaining or the translating is left to the BIPOC folks, and that is not necessary. So when we're talking about disrupting harm, that could be your chosen way to interact, but it is not something that you need to do if you do not feel like you're ready for it. So when we're talking about how to show up in these spaces and places, and these are particularly tools that anyone can use, but especially we had intended for this webinar to be primarily for the white folks that were going to be at HINAC so that they could start thinking about how they wanted to show up and really be leaning into dismantling racism, to identifying transphobic comments. And so we're just put these out there for people to think about. First off is separating the person from the behavior or from the comments. When you're talking to someone, it can be really easier to say that's a racist remark, as opposed to labeling the person as like, you're a racist, so that they then can have an opportunity to dismantle why they might be saying that, to be thinking about what that means and really interpreting and interrogating their own belief systems or why they feel that was even appropriate to say in that space. To refocus on the words and actions, so to think about what the person did, not who they are. And so you can go ahead and just say, that was not a funny joke. That was a transphobic joke. And, don't like that. It is always helpful to listen louder and to ask questions. As Diane said, what did you mean by that? Is always a good way to get people to try and stop and listen to what they said, to realize that they actually are being held accountable for their words, and that you're seeking to understand why they said that, why they might feel like that was appropriate. Sometimes paraphrasing, if people have had a long kind of tirade, and then and reflect on what it is. And so oftentimes, I've heard a number of really anti-immigrant conversations that have gone on, and I've paraphrased it and said, and I actually am not able to agree with you, because that's oftentimes these comments, like people will make a comment and they'll expect you to agree, or at least if you don't disagree, then it'll get worse and it'll snowball. And so you can just say, I'm just going to stop you right there. And I'm going to say that, this to me is really problematic. Joshua, I see your hand. Yeah, you have something you want to add?
Hey guys, I'm sorry. I just chimed in. I can't come with the camera. I'm in the hospital right now. I'll be out in a few days to come on to you guys. However, I am on the fence with this. I remember when I first started advocacy, I'm gonna try to be quick as possible. I used to hear people in groups that I'm in, organizations that I'm a part of, say that you'd like to use their white privilege to help with the whatever we're dealing with. And at first they used to offend me until I educated myself on me being ignorant. So I feel like if it comes from an ignorant space or it comes from a belittling space, then it's a chance for you to humbly. You can still be humble. You can still be radical, but you don't have to be radically um, rude. You can be radically humble and ask follow-up questions to see the intent of it. And is this something that makes you feel uncomfortable enough to where it's not personally, if it's a personal attack, then I feel that person should be pulled to the side, and that's a conversation between you all. At no point do I feel like adults at this event, when we all have one goal, and that's to end the epidemic, um, should be in a debacle or a debate or a fuss or anything beyond that about a person's opinion or their train of thought. Now, if they're just ignorant to how they or because what we may deem ignorant, they may not. I'm big on not yucking no one's yum. So I feel like that it's just time for me to exit myself out the conversation humbly again and go say a prayer and move on. But I'm really shocked that it's something I'm glad that it's happening, but to hear that this even happens, but I think it's just a time to bow out gracefully from that conversation and don't let it ruin your weekend. Because at the end of the day, I feel like we're all there for one goal. And I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Joshua. And I'm sorry that you're in the hospital, and I hope you're feeling better and looking forward to seeing you at HINAC.
Oh yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah, that's the thing about our community, right? We roll tough. And so being in the hospital and sharing such really profound thoughts, I appreciate you so much. And I think that that's correct, which is that absolutely, that there are times where we are able to educate people, and there are times where we just need to exit. Grace, I'm going to go ahead and finish this slide, and then I'll check and see if people have questions, if that's all right. So we have the sort of the ouch and then educate, which is sort of what Joshua was actually saying, acknowledging that that was something that was inappropriate or painful, and then perhaps educating people, pointing out the harm of what was said. And then, as always, we want to pay attention to impact versus intent. I might say something that is completely inappropriate, and I don't mean to do any harm. I am either perhaps just sharing what I have grown up mentioning, and have not yet been able to identify that it is either racist or that it has some really problematic undertones. And so I can apologize for my impact for people hearing that when my intent was not to do harm. So we want to go ahead and make sure that we really are doing that. And the part that I want to add here is that one of the things that we're hoping to encourage, especially white folks, to do at HINAC is to show up and actually really white people get your white people. So if you are a person who is at HIV is not a crime, and you are a white person, and you hear somebody saying something that is racist or something that is transphobic, step in and say something. Use these kind of skills that we're talking about here, because we want to make sure that we are allies and accomplices. And I think Kelly said it the best of anyone I've ever heard. We want to be people that it is unsafe to be racist around as well, because we really envision a world that can have Black liberation in it, that can have trans liberation in it, that can lift up communities of color. And as we know, and really, as we come to do this work around especially HIV modernization and decriminalization, we know that HIV is a racial justice issue, that it impacts our communities of colors more. And so we know that we need to stand up and actively interrupt. And I just want to say, we'll share a resource that is about calling out and calling in. And people are like, well, should I call people out? Should I call people in? And one of the things that we're talking about is calling people in gives them a chance to learn to do better. So I can say to somebody, come on in and actually tell me why you said that. What was your intention in saying that? Or, that sounds like you've thought about it a lot. Can you tell me more? So really giving people a chance to explain, to think, to question. calling people out, and it's sometimes necessary, is that we have to just stop the harm when it's happening. So if there's something that is really unsafe, that is really violent, that is really problematic, sometimes you just need to say like, whoa, I'm going to stop you right there. That is not okay. You know, that is not the way we think here at HIV is Not a Crime. We do not kind of double down on racist statements, or we do not allow people to make transphobic comments and get away with it. And so part of this is us learning how to do it in this small, safe training academy space so that we can go out and then implement it in the world as well. So those are just a few tools and ways that we are going to invite us to interrupt harm. And I really appreciate, Joshua, your comment. I'm going to stop and see if there are any questions or comments. Grace, I think you had one. I'll go to you first and see if there's anyone else.
Now, I was just trying to echo Joshua's sentiments that I've had one or two white people support me, and every time they want to support me, they tell me, oh, let me use my white privilege to help you with this. Let me use my white privilege to help you apply for this. And I think it's well intended, but it's poor execution. It makes you feel belittled. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Grace. And I'm sorry that happened. And that has happened to you a couple of times, it sounds like. Anyone else want to share anything or ask any questions?
Well, Barb, you already know I'm always, and I saw Sarah right after I came off from mute, but first I want to acknowledge Kelly in stating the amount of folks that are represented as BIPOC versus everything else in between. But one of my questions is will you all then use this presentation to possibly, when in your institute, although I know your institute is open to all, but for those individuals that are not necessarily present, to share this information with them as well, and maybe even some of the feedback you get from tonight with specifically white folks dismantling racism. Was more so my question.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So we have 2 hours for the White Folks Institute, and we are always open to BIPOC folks joining us because we want to be open, transparent, and accountable for what happens in those training sessions. So everyone is welcome to come and join us, and we will definitely be using maybe not these exact slides, but we will certainly be using this framework where we talk about identifying harm, we identify privilege, we identify ways that people can actually actively ally, accomplice, and be a part of the solution instead of continuing to be part of a problem. And we will for sure start the Institute off by saying that we were disappointed that more folks did not join us for this training.
Thank you. Thank you, Barb.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah.
Oh, thank you, Bob. As well, I put in the chat, you hear yourself, you hear your thoughts before you even open your mouth. So if you hear yourself saying something derogatory, stop. Don't let it come out. It's pretty simple, but it doesn't always work that way. But yeah, you hear your thoughts before you even say anything. So just be careful.
That's such a great reminder that sometimes we get into community and we get a little bit too comfortable and we just figure we get to just say it all out. And so people can slow down, think a little bit more before they're actually speaking. That's such a good reminder. Thank you. All right. I really appreciate everyone for your comments and thoughts on this, how to disrupt harm and how we can show up better at HINAC. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Eric for our conclusion.
I've been on meetings since 2020, and you would think I would know how to unmute myself. Thank you, Barb, and Kelly, and everyone else for adding all of your input. I feel like this is really important work. I'm kind of new to this work, taking baby steps, but I think it's important to create a commitment. So how will you show up at HINAC? So what will you do to support this work? I know what I'm going to do, and I'll start off. What I'll do to support this work is to show up, to keep learning, and to take this work outside of HINAC and take it home with me to unlearn things that I was taught way back when. I am constantly unlearning terrible habits, and just taking this work and working on myself. Does anybody else have any commitments that they're going to make on how they'll show up at HINAC?
This is Joshua again. I plan on showing up just like anywhere else when I go to these things to walk, talk, act, and think out of love, and strictly be there for the gift of love, and to obtain as much knowledge and training as possible so I can advocate not just for myself, but advocate for the people that I advocate for, and to continue to learn the adjustments that's been made in this work, because it's constantly changing, and to just be there in a community setting for each other. I'm flabbergasted right now that and I never probably would even, this is my first time, so I probably wouldn't have even thought that far, that conversations like that or people like that exist, because UCHA was so different. But I did notice the cliques, and I noticed that they do have cliques just like school and anywhere else. So I just won't engage in those. But I'm sure, there's going to be some people that we can relate to, and I feel like ignorance should be left. Sarah said it best. You know what's coming out of your mouth. Now, some people are a product of their environment or a product of how they were raised. So if that's the case, then we let them be them. And if we can't educate them by coming to them personally, I don't feel like it's something that should be done out of embarrassment or done unless it's done to you. Well, no, I'm not that person either. I don't believe in tick for tack. But if it's not done to you like that, I still wouldn't do it like that. Take them to the side, find out their intent. If the intent seems wrong to you and you can't come to a common ground, then again, bow out gracefully. And there's hundreds of other people there that you can meet with and learn from. And that's how I plan to show up. I plan to show up for knowledge and a break away from Louisiana.
All right. Thank you, Joshua. I appreciate your commitment. I know we're coming up on time, so I'm going to give you a quick little closing here. So HINAC is in 9 days. Actually, now that today's over, it's in 8 days. We have the community support team who have been working really diligently on creating a brave space for us all, and creating safer spaces for everyone. Also, this will be a learning opportunity for everyone involved. I am a firm believer in learning never ends. That's one of my core values. I am constantly looking to improve myself and to learn more. My brain is a sponge. And then HUVA. If you haven't signed up for HUVA, please do so. You can. It's a really great way to interact with each other. All of the Institute leaders are on there, and you can message them personally through HUVA, as well as getting more information on the institutes that you'll be attending on Sunday. And I am looking forward to seeing everyone in person, because it's been a long 2 years since our last visit. So with that, I thank you all for being here. Thank you so much for showing up. That right there just shows your commitment to what we're doing here today.